So the new update is live right now, and it actually brings in quite a nice number of features. The two new armor sets over here, and specifically
Lagiacrus.
one is definitely a very cool option that actually involves a boss mechanic as one of its skills. But today we're going to take a look at some of the other stuff as well, and of course some of the new features. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So to start the Lagiacrus hunt, you're going to need to start the Trembling Blue Current's main mission. You're going to do that by talking to Eric over here at the main camp over in the Scarlet Forest. And after a brief investigation, you're going to get this really awesome fight right away. And let me tell you, it's engaging, but it's not very difficult, at least not against the default version. There are a few attacks that you may want to pay attention to, mostly involving its electricity discharge. So whenever you see it charging up the spikes on its back, you're going to want to stay clear, as there's usually going to be a very strong current following right after this, unless you want to like waste all of your stamina and get a bit of damage blocking that, which is also, by the way, possible. But there's a second similar version in which the boss gets on its hind legs and charges a very powerful electric storm that you can easily dodge right through, get behind it, and you're going to avoid all of that damage. Also similarly, you're going to notice that oftentimes it uses a ranged electrical attack that you can similarly just dodge to either side, since the auto tracking over here is pretty much non-existent. But besides that, yeah, the boss fight is not really that difficult. Besides, of course, a few like body slams and jump attacks over here, it pretty much goes rather smoothly up until you actually have to track it all the way back to its lair. And here is where things become a lot more interesting, because when it gets here, it's going to eventually jump into the water and charge a very powerful electrical attack. So you're going to be forced to also jump with it and go into the second portion of the combat, which is not going to be full underwater combat. You do have only a few actions to perform over here, mostly involving evading, but you also have the options to swim up or down to dodge some of the incoming attacks. You can also use the environment, like pulling down some of these environmental hazards on top of its head in an attempt to maybe stun it and whatnot. But besides that, your biggest source of damage is going to be a combination between using your slinger and also using the focused attack. So you can probably notice that there's quite a bit of submerged rubble over here that you can grab with your slinger and then aim it at the boss to deal damage and inflict some wounds. And even if you don't inflict wounds, what you can do is hold down that aim button and then press R1 to latch onto the boss and inflict the wounds with a knife, just as you would normally if you were to jump on its back. And in this case, you can go ahead and inflict those wounds or use existing ones to basically follow with a focused attack, and that's going to also deal a significant amount of damage. Do, however, keep in mind that if it does manage to at least begin an electric charge attack, you're still going to get damaged even in the middle of that animation, so just be careful about that. But once you deal enough damage to the boss, you're going to emerge from the water with it after a really cool animation, and you can go ahead and resume the hunt. In this case, for the first mission, to complete it, you're going to have to capture this specimen, so do make sure that you have a shock trap as well as a couple of those sleeping bombs with you to bring it back to base. But besides that, let's take a look at some of the weapons and the armor set over here. What you will notice is that the weapons over here are actually very strong, and surprisingly, they feature equipment skills that are already pretty much part of the meta for each of the respective weapons. So for example, the sword and shield already has an offensive guard with this by default. The greatsword version has something like the focus, bow has tetrad shot, and we also have the slugger on for example the hammer, but others come with different passives like power prolonger and whatnot. So a lot of these weapons actually already have the meta skills you already want on them. And what this means is that now you have a tier 3, 2 and 1 extra slot over here. Does this mean these are going to be better than the Artian weapons? Well, probably not, but it's going to be damn close. I mean, given the fact that, for example, we already have one of the skills very desirable for these builds anyway, and besides that, we also have the Convert Thunder Resistance, which is going to make it so that it benefits your weapon's elemental attack power proportional to your Thunder Resistance in this case, so it can probably make up a few percentages of extra damage over there. So very close, assuming that Thunder is an element that works for your current build. Now, going over the armor itself, I was actually surprised just how good it is. It seems that it's actually coming in with some of the most desirable skills. We can pretty much achieve full maximum might and full weakness exploit even if we go with the beta set. On top of the fact that we get the stamina surge bits, and if you go with some of the parts of the alpha instead, you can also get more points into latent power. But overall, it looks like at least some of these pieces can be a good option when you're combining sets. Like the helmet can definitely be part of various meta sets now that we have 2 points of maximum might just from it. Besides that, we also have the very cool new skill effect, which is the Leviathan's Fury. Azure Bolt 1 and 2 gives us a temporary increase in affinity and can even deal extra thunder damage once it creates enough buildup of that. Now, I went ahead and did a bunch of testing, and here is how it works basically. So Azure level 1 and level 2 both have that build up but also an internal cooldown. So the build up is going to immediately start, and it only takes a couple of seconds. If you just unsheathed your weapon and do a bit of damage, you will notice the sparks immediately flying, and eventually you're going to perform the discharge. In the case of Azure Bolt level 1, it's almost always going to be 52 damage on the dot over there, no matter what body part you hit. Meanwhile, in the case of Azure Bolt level 2, it's always going to be 121. Both of them also give you plus 15% extra affinity once the bolt triggers. However, the timer slightly differs. So in the case of Azure Bolt level 1, it's only going to last for about 20 seconds. Meanwhile, for the level 2 one, it's going to last for 30 seconds instead. But in both of the scenarios, once you trigger the buff, you're then going to have an internal cooldown, which seems to be closer to about a minute, though in the case of Azure Bolt level 1, it seems to be closer to about 50 seconds. So overall, the level 2, the biggest gain is going to be the fact that the 15% affinity buff lasts for 10 seconds longer, and the fact that it's going to also deal more damage, more than double, 121 compared to just 52. Is it worth it? I would say definitely not compared to the antivirus Gormagala set piece, which is going to give you a much bigger bonus, but it does stack with some of the other effects on your weapons, like blast explosions, trigger and can trigger at the same time with this, so you kind of have two sources of damage. It's an interesting mechanic. I just wish that the cooldown timer on it, the internal cooldown, was much lower than a minute. Hopefully they reduce it to like at least 30 seconds, maybe 45 seconds tops, but it would be better if it were just lower than it currently is. But let's go over the next boss, which is going to be Seregios. You're going to get this by starting the mission called Clear with a Chance of Sandstorm over here at Nebi in the Kunafa village. Once you go through the dialogues and the cutscene, you're going to eventually get to the boss fight. And it is engaging just like the one before, but way easier, I'm not gonna lie. There are a few attacks over here though that you may want to pay attention to. Most of the time you're going to notice that the boss is only using its legs and its tail for attacking, but what you should know is that whenever it performs an attack, usually a second one follows right after. So if it's doing any leg sweeps or scrapes on the ground, usually it's going to immediately do another one with the other leg as well. Otherwise, it's also going to do similarly when performing flybys. Sometimes it even does like 4 attacks in a row, so 2 scrapes and a couple of flybys, both of which you can go ahead and perfect guard through, even get like a guard counter if you have a SNS or a similar weapon. But otherwise, it's like very easy either to dodge or to guard through these attacks for the most part. The only more difficult attack, at least for the base version, is going to be the tail ones. Specifically, if you linger back and especially behind it, it's going to use its poison tail to throw some of these spikes at you, which can actually make a ton of poison build up. So you want to be careful about that, because you cannot block the poison either, at least not from what I've been able to tell. Now, in terms of the weapons, we do have them right here, and they may not look like much, but they do come with an interesting skill, which is the blade scale honing. So this is basically special sharpness. Narrowly evading a monster's attacks while your weapon is drawn grants special sharpness. So probably this is not going to work with the EI Spirit Slash and the other like sheathed attacks from the longsword, since technically that's a sheathed weapon, not a drawn weapon. But otherwise it should work with all other types of dodges that have the weapon drawn already. So I'm not sure if we're even at that stage where sharpness is even a problem, but I would assume that something like dual blades will benefit a lot from this, maybe even like SNS, and I would imagine any other weapon that kind of has problems with sharpness could benefit from this quite a bit. But you are doing some big sacrifices. You only have the level 3 to 1 slots over there, which means it's a big compromise compared to the RTN weapons still, and also significantly weaker from the looks of it compared to the Lagiacrus versions too. But you can definitely go ahead and at least farm it for the looks. In terms of the armor, it gets a little bit more interesting because I would say the armor feels like it's a bit more useful, and again plays on that perfect dodge mechanic, both with the passives and also with the armor skill over here. So you will see that we have quite a bit of adrenaline rush on pretty much every single piece. We can get a level 5 easy even with the beta set, besides getting some extra points into evade window, agitator, so it plays off and feeds into the weapon buff as well. But we also of course have the Seregios tenacity over here, which further helps a little bit with that, and the scaled layering. So in this case, Razor Edge extends the duration of adrenaline rush. If triggered again while the skill is active, it extends the effect duration once. And then at rank 2, if triggered again while the skill is active, it also increases our attack. Besides the fact that we get the adrenaline from scale layering, temporarily reducing stamina depletion when health is at 40% or lower. So it is going to be a bit more high risk but higher reward. But for now, let me know down below in the comments, are you planning to use the new armor sets? And if so, which one of them? There's definitely going to be a build on the channel coming really soon once I get the full armor, because I really want to go over with that thunder mechanic. But in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.